Hi, this is Kate. So, mostly because of COVID, I see these people on Facebook and social media post it like a doozy, like a big fat lie. And sometimes I'll just confront them depending on how the person will react. It's not very often that I confront them. If I want to maintain the friendship, I just report it to Facebook because I feel like all these fat lies just keep recirculating over and over again, and they keep believing it over and over again. So for me, it's kind of like trash alongside of the road. You're just getting rid of the litter, but you maintain the friendship with the person.
Okay. 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 Our guests are here as well. Great.
My best friend of 30 years has been lost to this cult. I do not know if she's QAnon. I do not know how far this goes, but she is rage posting, and she's losing a lot of friends, people she's known even longer than me, and she doesn't understand why. And she is absolutely assured of her knowledge that she is right, everybody else is wrong, everybody else is being deceived. And no matter how much evidence I put to the contrary or try to lead her through the thought process, Georgia, recounts and whatnot, nope. So this isn't about being logical. It's not even about the truth. It's about what she wants to believe. And that was the hard realization to come with. And so I can't give her information about facts that's irrelevant. She'll just double down. And so I'm left with, how do I soften this blow? How do I get her to start looking outside of it? And I realize this is going to be a long-term commitment, but I'm going to do this, see if I can't get her out of it.
Good evening and welcome to the Lincoln Project's We're Speaking. I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May. Every Wednesday, we're speaking with you about the most pressing issues facing our country, but with a twist. Our focus is the impact those issues have on women and raising up the voices of women working to make real, lasting change and progress.
Change is often about creating and mobilizing movements, bringing people together in common cause, which can have extraordinarily good outcomes or incredibly destructive ones. Voter registration and get out the vote movements in Georgia are examples of extraordinarily good ones. But the day after we saw Senators Warnock and Ossoff elected, we witnessed a movement attempt to end our democracy in a violent insurrection. If we're going to protect our democracy, we have to understand that there is a really dark side to some movements. And joining us to talk about that tonight is Ceally Smith, who went down the QAnon rabbit hole, but emerged with a very thought-provoking perspective on how and why so many Americans are getting lost in this labyrinth and how she got her life back.
And we're also talking to Dr. Irma McClaurin. She is with us to talk about progress and the potential of movements and working for good. She has been working to, as she describes, change minds, change hearts, change behavior to achieve transformation on issues of race and gender in the U.S. for decades. She's going to have a lot to say, so we'll talk to her about the current state of things and how we can work together to create real, lasting change for the better.
You know, a lot of what Maya and I talk about on this show and in general is about creating that real lasting change. As women, we often call on individuals and organizations to take really hard looks inward, identify shortcomings, flaws, inequities they have built in, and take action to do better. If we truly want to create change for the good, it's important to become aware of all of our blind spots, failings, and the ways that we sometimes fall short of the standards that we set for ourselves and for others. And that's a process that the Lincoln Project is going through right now. Both individually and organizationally, we are imperfect, some more than others. And identifying those flaws in ourselves is not easy to do. Because of that, the Lincoln Project is undergoing a review by a highly respected outside firm. That's going to be completed within the coming weeks. We're committed to making the changes necessary to create an organization that functions as well internally as it did fighting against Donald Trump. Never making mistakes is not what makes an individual or an organization good. Character, integrity, and goodness are an outcome of accountability and a willingness to acknowledge when you make mistakes and take the necessary steps to understand why they happened and make sure they won't be repeated. I really appreciate the outpouring of support for both the Lincoln Project and for this show. And I'm very grateful for the messages telling us to fix whatever it is that's broken and get the hell back to work. We're doing both because both of those are important. And we owe it to everyone who works at and is part of the mission and movement that is the Lincoln Project, which includes you and millions of others who joined with us to help defeat Donald Trump and Trumpism. Now, we accomplished the first, but the battle against Trumpism is far from over. Winning that fight is our only option. And there are really powerful dark forces in our country who want us to fail. We owe it to our democracy and to our kids and our grandkids to make sure that doesn't happen. So we thank you for holding us accountable and joining us in the work ahead. It is going to take all of us working really hard and working together.
Yeah, working together with a focus on the mission, democracy. It's really that simple. You know, I moved back to the US in late 2013 after almost a decade abroad because I wanted this American life for my daughter. A multitude of races, genders, political leanings, trying to figure out how to get along. You know, the whole United We Stand thing. And since then, I've witnessed the relentless assault of the GOP to disenfranchise Black people, to sow division, to spread disinformation. It's proven that our democracy is more fragile than many of us realized, and it's scary. We have to continue the fight to protect our democracy. And this mission is bigger than any one individual. The Lincoln Project is a group project, and it's an all hands on deck effort, right, to infuse truth into the process. The attack on our democracy has been normalized, with GOP senators refusing to hold Trump and his followers accountable. We can't let that happen. This is not normal. And so we're really glad, I'm super happy that you're staying in the fight with us, because we can't do it without you. And we have asked to hear from you, especially about disinformation. Do you have friends who have gone down the rabbit hole? What are you doing to reclaim the friends and family that have been lost due to disinformation? You can give us a ring at 646-374-8339 and leave us your thoughts, or tweet us, #We're Speaking, or leave a comment on Facebook and also on Twitter. We have a comment from Scout on Twitter. Scout writes, "Small steps. I try and find little ways to educate on history or culture. I'm a high school social studies teacher. My dad and boyfriend have gone down the Fox rabbit hole. I refuse to write them off for believing a well-packaged solution to fearful events."
We also have a Facebook post from Lori Ryan, and Lori writes, "My being angry and hateful is not going to help them. Reason doesn't seem to work. I don't want to give up just yet. With that being said, I so dislike their moral views. I can't handle the negativity. I will continue to love them from afar and will be forgiving if they find their way back." I find those really heartbreaking. There are so many families that have been ripped apart by this, by the QAnon movement, and Trump in general. It's just heartbreaking to see what's happened.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah, which leads us right into our first guest. I'm so thrilled that Ceally Smith is with us here tonight. She knows from personal experience how it's possible to get sucked into a world high on unfounded conspiracies and really low on facts, but it can all seem so real. So Ceally herself went down the QAnon rabbit hole, but we're pleased that she came back out the other side, and she is here to talk with us this evening. So welcome, Ceally. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Ceally.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, this is a huge service that you're doing for folks to talk about what this experience is like. So before we get in too far, can you talk to us a little bit about what QAnon is? We have a tendency to think everybody at this point knows, but there are an awful lot of folks who are just now becoming familiar with it. So what is it, and just how deep does it go?
So, first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to come on here and speak and share my story. And when people ask me what QAnon is, I really don't like using the word movement or cult, because they're trigger words, quite honestly. And I tell people it's a story. And some people have chose to believe that story, me being one of them, and some people choose to not believe the story. But essentially, it's a story, and it is a compiled of stories, a divisive story to really divide our people. Quite honestly, it distills fear in people. It also is a place where people can be distracted from their own internal trauma, or things that they're really not wanting to look at. It's something that they can put their time and energy into. And a lot of people resonated with it because a lot of the story is, really speaking to people's internal upsets. And, like I said, I was one of those people that got sucked into it very briefly. And when I did, it was very scary to go through it. But I'm definitely on the other side of it. And I'm hoping that I can help others, come out and help other people with their families and their friends, just kind of see a subjective or a personal view, so that they can help their loved ones come out on the other end.
So, Ceally, thank you for sharing. When you say trigger, and I want to think about like the catalyst, because it is a fantastical story, right? There are some of the elements that I've heard, I'm like, that's wait, it sounds insane. What was the catalyst for you starting to believe in this? And could you kind of walk us down that path?
So the catalyst was I actually was dating someone, and he's an amazing person. And even though we are no longer together, I was also in a place where I was not understanding of information. I didn't have the facts. I didn't know political sides or have really the fundamental or the knowledge, because it was always so cumbersome to like look up information about Republicans or Democrats or political views. Like there was no information for me to really like go get that wasn't biased. So when me and him first met, and he started really talking about how much he loved Trump, and I didn't have a political background. So I was like, well, that's where he's at. But we never talked about it. But once it started kind of getting more and more intense, especially when Epstein got arrested, that was my catalyst. Was I was dating someone that was giving me like these seed plantings. And quite honestly, I want to be really objective and hold myself accountable in this conversation. I was very naive. And I also was ignorant in some ways. And I wasn't aware of that. I was, unconsciously, dating someone that I learned to trust. I, went down a path with him that was, blissful in our relationship. So of course, when he was telling me this information, I think anybody that really looks up to someone, you're going to believe them. Mm-hmm. And so my catalyst was having an influencer in my life, which was a boyfriend for me at the time.
You mentioned Jeffrey Epstein's arrest, and one of the big components of the QAnon story is the mass pedophilia ring that is being led by Hollywood elites and Democrats. And so that kind of outlandish story that was being told and had real world, like in the pizza parlor, someone showing up ready to shoot the place up because they thought it was a location where this was happening. There were real world consequences. But there are pedophile rings. There are people who abuse children. So when the Jeffrey Epstein thing happened, and then he died while he was in custody, was that a nugget of reality that made the unreality seem more real, or at least possible?
Actually, it's a good question. So actually, that is why I started believing him. Like, because when he first started telling me stuff, it wasn't like he was, like just spouting off information. And I was like, oh, I believe all that you're saying. It wasn't that. I was being objective in some ways. I was like, well, can you show me the evidence? Like, I'm having a really hard time, like, believing this. Like, I have no political background or really understandings or fundamentals or foundations of that. So when he started telling me about Epstein and Hollywood and all this stuff, and I was like, if that was really going on, I'm almost positive like things would be, not what they are right now. Well, then when I found out he got arrested, I was like, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. There's some reality to this. And oh my goodness, like, I need to start looking into this. So that's kind of what was my hook, was actually when Epstein got arrested. And so after that point, I, started doing my own research, and, 8 to 12 hours later, being really sucked into not just watching videos, these stories of people coming forward and saying like, I was molested by Hollywood, or, just these stories, you start believing it. You truly start really believing like these people's stories. And then you start feeling immense pain and struggle, because you're like, all of a sudden you start really looking at the world like you can't trust anything or anyone. And you just start questioning things. And once I started going down that, I realized, like, I just realized a whole bunch of other stuff.
That had to be incredibly hard. And in some ways, I'm wondering if it was isolating. When you were having these conversations with him and being, kind of skeptical about it in the beginning, and then you started doing your own research, did you also start trying to reach out to other people who were believers? And did you connect with them on that level? Is there like a whole community feel?
Well, it was really shocking to me, because when I started kind of putting my feelers out to see, like, hey, does anybody know what Q is? Or have you heard of this? It was very shocking to me to see how many people in my community, people like of well respect, I'm talking doctors, lawyers, people in the community. Like, to this day, I'm still really shocked about how many people are really, that really do not trust our democracy. They don't trust the news. And quite frankly, there's still parts of me that I don't trust the news, because of my, of my fear base and kind of where I'm at in that journey of processing and learning.
And was
Yeah,
there?
I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Maya.
No, and I was just curious, like, how much time were you spending reading this kind of stuff? Like, how all-consuming is it?
Well, that's kind of a subjective thing for each person that gets involved. For me, it was about 8 to 12 hours that I like totally got consumed into it, because I do own 3 businesses. I have 2 children. So like, when I got into it and when I started kind of taking a deep dive, I really had to pull myself out of it, because I started becoming depressed and my children were being affected. And immediately I just witnessed that, and it was leaking in parts of my business. And I was like, this is not good. Like, this does not work for me. So for me personally, on a total, like, I actually have like my screen time app where it shows me like how much I am in each things. And I spent about 8 to 12 hours, give or take, watching videos, reading stories, and really going down this like hole that you have to dig yourself out of. But I was also still dating someone that it was his daily life. So like, he would wake up and he was scrolling all day, go to work, checking in, sending me things throughout the day. So like, even though I wasn't doing research, I was being exposed to it every day, on the hour, every hour.
Yeah, and that fear is incredibly powerful. It's a powerful way to influence people and to keep sucking them in further. But at some point, you did decide, maybe things weren't adding up, or as you were saying, I really have too much to do to spend the time, that I would need to stay deep in this. What was it that started making you question and come back out the other side? And do you have thoughts on, is there anything out of that you can give to people who are watching tonight, who have friends and family and loved ones who are deeply in this right now, that might help them start reaching those folks and getting them to the point you are?
Sure. That's a really good question. For me, I went from a place prior to that, where I was living my best life. My business is successful. My children and I were healthy and happy. And, you know, I had that comparison for me to see the shift when it happened. And when that happened for me, like there's a picture that I sent you guys where I have like long dark hair. And this was prior to me going through that. Like after I went through it, I actually started losing my hair. And
Wow.
so this is like all of my natural hair color. And like I physically started getting sick. And so when you have that kind of comparison, I don't want to get emotional, but I'm feeling it coming. um, when you really see your life start kind of going down a path where you're like, I never thought I would be here. And granted, like me and that person's relationship, you know, isn't compared to some people where, you know, they're in a physical abuse or anything like that. It just was, you know, he was running from his own traumas in that through joining that story. It was keeping him distracted, and he believed it so much. And, you know, I don't know if he still believes it now, but it's keeping him away from him working on him. And what it was doing is it was keeping me away from working on me. And it was keeping me away from being there for my children and my business that I love because I get to help people every day. And once I started realizing that it was taking me away from that, you know, it's like really like I now understand, like, you know, how people that have drug addiction or even alcohol, like,
Mhm.
you know, you just don't have the the pull to get you there. I am one of the fortunate ones that I had that contrast. So some people that are being pulled into this, they don't have that contrast. They're coming from abusive families or
Right.
from trauma life. So it's easy for them to stay, you know, on this thing because it keeps that internal drugstore going. It keeps them in that. For me, I just, you know, I've gone through therapy and I really encourage it. Honestly, you know, me and my kids, we still do therapy. And the therapy that we get is helpful and it's resourceful and it aids in helping those fears because I think it's very human to have fears. I mean, we have to really think about it. My grandparents went to war. Your grandparents were in war. Like my generation has not really seen the war and things that our grandparents did. So we're like having that generational traumas of not having to deal with that. So we haven't seen anything like this. Like my kids and hopefully will never have to deal with that. But truthfully, for anybody that's watching, it really has to be them that makes that decision. Like they have to really come to this realization, which I've had a lot of people reach out to me. Actually, I have a really good friend that was in like very, very close friend that is still trying to pull himself out of it. But by him seeing me do it, he feels like, okay, there is some hope there. And I just really think we just need to continue to love each other through it. Even if someone's kicking and screaming through the process of not wanting to believe it, just really holding space and just saying, I hear you, I see you. And it's really easy. Like I see it when we watch the news, like it's easy to be combative and to bully. We do it to Trump, we do it to Biden. I mean, it's both sides. And that's really where we aren't connecting as humans. Like, I didn't grow up that way. I grew up with love no matter what color was on your skin. I don't even see color. So for me, it's like, I personally just think anybody that's watching this, you have to let them come to that realization. You can't force them. You can set up your own boundaries, love yourself, and say, hey, look, that's where you're at. I appreciate where you're at. I love you, but it's not for me. It's not in alignment. And they're just going to have to go through that process. You know, like I had to do it with my grandmother. You know, she was extremely combative over some things. And, you know, that was tough to do. But I ultimately have to take care of my own sanity so that I can show up, not just for my children, but for myself. And I think that's the one message I would give anybody is just work on yourself, focus on where you're at. And yes, by you doing that, you're going to naturally express into the world and naturally give that part of you to what you're doing, like what you ladies are doing in this, news station. By you taking care of yourself, you're able to show up and do these broadcasts for people. I mean, if you were off the deep end, it might be a different story. You probably wouldn't be here, but you're continuing to focus on yourself. So I just keep telling people, just focus on yourself and just hold space and love them from where they're at. And, if they come around, it's because they want a difference. And that's hard to hear.
It's also, I'm sorry. It's also, Ceally, because people like you are willing to share your stories and show people that there is a path out of this. You're really helping people by doing this. And I know that's your day job. You're doing it tonight with us. So thank you so much for coming in and being so honest and vulnerable. It's not easy to do, and really respect you joining us and talking with us tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity again.
Thank you.
Wow. That was so sobering to hear. I mean, when she talks about hope, like that's the part where it's like, it sounds like what people need to get out of it is hope, that there's something beyond whatever trauma it is that they're escaping, that there's something, and so linking it to like when she talked about her children and realizing that it was taking away time and energy from her children, like that hit hard. And I think, we're seeing so many relationships and friendships get fractured that I'm hoping people will steer towards that side of things and say like, hey, like, I miss you. I love you. Kind of thing. Because
yeah, it does seem like a lot of people who, I mean, she did have that perspective of she was in a good place in her life before she got sucked into this. But so many people who end up being drawn in to QAnon or, other things like this they're not in a good place. And so it makes sense that it's a place where they're finding a sense of community and even purpose. Because a lot of these people feel as though they're actually doing something for the greater good, and not realizing how incredibly destructive what they're actually being used to do is. But
that's the part that it's that destructive part, because we have to be very real. Too many people believe in these theories, and it's jeopardizing our democracy at this point. And there's this like thin line between truth and reality right now. It's very scary. And so I don't want to take away from that either, because we have to fight this kind of disinformation with good information. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this isn't yet another place where we're seeing that COVID has had an incredibly detrimental impact on our world, because with all the isolation and pain that people have been in, it's just created a perfect storm. So I'm glad she was here to talk with us tonight.
Yeah, same. With that, we're going to go to a quick break and catch our breath.
Yeah.
At this time, I will administer the oath to all senators in the chamber. Do you solemnly swear?
I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God.
You swore to this.
Before God and country.
You took the oath.
And you broke it.
Your God
and your country
are watching.
Hi, my name is Susan Farrow. I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm the youngest of three. My oldest sister has a master's degree in education. She recently retired, and she is a massive QAnon believer / promoter. And she was the first sister that I was not able to communicate with. It was my decision for my sanity.
Wow. Hearing these stories,
so
hearing
much
these
pain.
voicemails, these comments. Yeah. I mean, you can just feel it and hear it and read it. I mean, we've gotten over 11,000 comments under a Facebook post about it. And people are really, really feeling kind of lost in how to communicate with their family members about this. And so we'd love to hear from more of you. If you have a family member or a friend who's gone down the rabbit hole, how have you helped them get out? We do want to hear your stories so we can share and learn from each other, because really at this point, this is how we're going to get out of this, by learning from each other, listening. You can give us a ring at 646-374-8339 and leave us your thoughts. You can tweet us using hashtag We're Speaking, or leave a comment on Facebook.
We'll share another Facebook comment that we got from Trina Penza Garcia, who wrote, "It's very hard being in this situation, being married to someone who is so far gone down the rabbit hole that the defense of asinine beliefs and theories is more important than the relationship for him. We finally had a pretty major argument this week, and he has agreed to couples counseling and individual therapy."
And we also have a post from Twitter, and they say, "I still challenge them with reality. When they bring up the nonsense du jour and post BS on Facebook, still believe in the long-term power of truth to persuade many, though not all. Won't give up on them for being temporarily stupid, but won't lose sleep over it either. Truth is winning."
Oh, well, I certainly hope they're right. We have one more Facebook comment that we want to share with you. Cindy Lou Nelson writes, "We need to reevaluate the value of civics in education. We also need tighter laws for disseminating disinformation. If I lie on a job application or a loan application, I'm held accountable. If we allow our leaders to lie and we do not require ethical behavior, we are lost." Yeah, that's certainly true. And the lack of just personal accountability that so many people in public office have now, that they don't just intrinsically feel compelled to tell the truth when they're in Congress, and that it just so easily comes to them to lie at this point, which gets us right into this week's Oh For Fuck's Sake Awards. Each week we'd like to take a few minutes to shine a spotlight on a few of the folks whose actions have exceeded our expectations and truly outdone themselves in being deceitful, dishonest, and anti-democratic, and recognize them with this award. It's our way of saying, we see you, and you're horrible. So here are this week's nominees.
Oh, our first nominee this week is Lindsey Graham. Lindsey, you gleefully continue to undermine our democracy by perpetuating the big lie that Joe Biden did not win a free and fair presidential election. You've threatened to have Kamala Harris impeached if Republicans win Congress back in 2022. You don't even have a reason, but I guess you figure you score points by threatening a Black woman. You're not even pretending to govern based on your non-existent principles anymore. You've made it clear. It's not about the American people. It's about winning. The Georgia Attorney General doesn't seem keen on your anything for dear leader philosophy. So well done putting yourself in the crosshairs of a Georgia election criminal investigation.
And next up, we have Ron Johnson. Honestly, Ron, you are so damned bland that you tend to just fade into the drapes or into Rob Portman. But You're a Russian propagandist and a devoted member of the Sedition Caucus. You spew the big lie on the Sunday shows with the best of them, and you are a first-rate gaslighter. The armed insurrection on January 6th wasn't really an armed insurrection, really. Ron, people died. People who were trying to protect you. You actually asked the Attorney General nominee, Merrick Garland, why he thinks the insurrectionists were Trump supporters. They've literally testified in court that they are. You even blame Biden for the extreme weather disaster in Texas because he wants more renewable, clean energy. So he's responsible for something that he hasn't done yet. So, Ron, you wrongly believe Mexico isn't sending us their best people. Well, that sure as hell seems to be true of Wisconsin because they gave us you. So, Comrade Johnson, you are second of our nominees this week.
Not to be outdone, Rand Paul. Wow, you of all ridiculous people think you can discredit Dr. Fauci, the most popular, trusted, and qualified infectious disease doctor in the country. And to proudly put on an arrogant exclamation point on your science denial, you act like such a selfish jackass and refuse to wear a mask while on the Senate floor. The simplest of things. You admire Rush Limbaugh, a hateful, misogynistic racist, a legend and patriot. Really, Rand? Not surprising, since you're another one perpetuating the big lie to anyone who will listen. Rand, we don't condone what your neighbor did to you, but we sure understand it.
Yeah, I get it. There's where my empathy comes out. I really feel for his neighbor. And finally, we normally only have 3 nominees, but Ted Cruz, you were just so bad this past week that we had to add a 4th. This week you claim Bill Barr is an example of the integrity we want in a U.S. Attorney General, and huge credit to Merrick Garland for maintaining his poker face when you said that during his confirmation hearing. When the former Capitol Hill police chief testified about the January 6th insurrection, the worst day of his life on the job, a job that protects you, you couldn't be bothered to stop texting. When people in your state had no power, no heat, no safe water, and were literally freezing to death, you abandoned them. You abandoned your dog, Ted. You even abandoned your dog. When your Cancun vacation was exposed, you didn't apologize for your bad judgment. Nope, you claimed you were being just a good dad, and you blamed it on your daughters. You're freaking U.S. Senator, Ted, and you blamed your kids for your actions. You've already won this award once, so, maybe give folks a chance, and you can take a few weeks off being a loathsome ass and, create some space for other loathsome asses. And, in seriousness, we have a lot of fun with this award, and we all have to laugh a little bit to keep our sanity. But these people we just talked about are actively trying to destroy our democracy. And Texans were betrayed by their elected officials. As a result, people suffered tremendously, and people actually died. If you can help, please do, especially at times like this. We don't have red states and blue states. We are just Americans, and that means we've got to take care of each other.
Yes, we have to. We're all we've got. So please donate to Feeding Texas. They're a statewide hunger relief charity helping more than 5 million Texans annually. Good 360 is another organization. You can go to their website, good360.org, click on disaster recovery, and you'll see winter storms. They need help with clothes, toiletries, food, and water. So if you can, please help. And you can still vote in the OFFS poll, along with more than 18,000 people who've already chimed in. So the poll is live on our Twitter at LPTV. We'll announce the winner of the losers at the end of the show. And coming up, Our next guest, Dr. Irma McClaurin, is going to help us figure out this mess. But first, this message from the Lincoln Project.
Meet the new Republican Party. Forget that boring Constitution. Yawn! The new Republican Party has so much more. We have conspiracy theories, insurrection, and don't forget, overthrowing elections. Now, let's meet its leaders. Minority Leader Marjorie Taylor Greene, the representative for the 14th District of QAnon. When she's not mocking shooting victims, she's warning us about Jewish space lasers. Pew, 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 pew. And there's House Whip Lauren Boebert. She's armed and ready to tweet the House Speaker's whereabouts in the middle of an armed insurrection. And chairman of the GOP conference? Why, it's Matt Gaetz. Oh yes, this Florida frat boy wears more makeup than an Instagram influencer. And introducing Ivanka Trump. The people she called patriots on January 6th turned out to be cop killers. Whoopsie daisy. Oh yes, the new Republican Party has something for everyone.
Terms and conditions apply. Must abandon logic, reason, and common sense. Unequal opportunity employer. Racists and conspiracy notes welcome. Must worship Donald Trump like a god. Offer not valid in Guam.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
I laugh so we don't cry because it doesn't even seem real. It seems like completely like, how can this be the reality we're living in?
Yeah, it's bonkers.
It seems like, yeah. It seems like the Republicans have chosen QAnon as that's the side, and the white supremacy that comes with it as one of their darlings. Our second guest is a poet, scholar, anthropologist who could probably address some of this. She was the former chief diversity officer of Teach for America. Dr. McClaurin, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
And you're also a fellow Grinnellian, so that was exciting for me too, in addition to being a poet, because I'm a poet, but also a fellow Grinnellian. So diversity is having a moment right now, and this has been something that you've worked at for years. Can you talk about a bit about your background in anthropology and how you come to this?
Well, I come to it with two perspectives. One is from a background in literature, and the other is from a background in anthropology, and also as an administrator working in higher education. I've worked for the federal government doing leadership education, and I also have worked in philanthropy as well. And in all of those arenas, I have been able to center diversity, mostly access, inclusion, and equity as cornerstones of the kind of work I do. Diversity is a term that's only 30 years old. Before that, we were talking about affirmative action, we were talking about multiculturalism, and all of these are in some ways iteration of the same thing, which is about having access to opportunities for everyone and not just some people.
Dr. McClaurin, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I have heard you talk about having a really holistic approach to doing this work, and that it means changing minds, hearts, behaviors, and policies. I love that because it gives people access points from so many different directions. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you mean by changing minds, hearts, behaviors, and policies?
Well, I think I would start with changing hearts. That one of the things that I have come to understand is that it takes a willingness for people wanting to change. No matter how many workshops you go to, how much diversity training that people participate in, if their heart is not in the right place, then you're not going to get much happening. Then once people are open and willing, you can provide them with information that provides them with the historical context about all the issues, how things have come to be, not misinformation or disinformation, but real information, factual information things about the fact that many of the concepts that we are talking about today are not new. We have had insurrection before in lots of different ways, the Jim Crow laws, all of these things are aspects of American history. So that when people say this is not who we are, they're really not being truthful. This is exactly who America is. And it's just that usually it is not on everyone's doorstep. And so I think once you get minds changed, then you can start talking about changing behavior. That operates on a personal, individual level, because the reality is that even if tomorrow all white supremacists disappeared, we would still have racism in this country because it's woven into the very structure of what this country is about. So we also have to start talking about changing policies and dismantling the very structures in which inequality is very much embedded.
Yeah, when you talk about, you mentioned earlier diversity, and the other term that I hear so often used now, as you were saying, it's been called a lot of different things, and we have buzzwords that we kind of move through until we reinvent a new one and feel actually doing something new and different, and we're just renaming things. But you, Maya, and I are all writers, so language really matters. And I was listening to someone say the other day that inclusion is a word that they find really troubling because it's still centering whiteness. When you say that we need to be inclusive, the we that has to reach out is white people. And so we're not even starting in the right place with the language. Can you talk to us about the way language has evolved and how it can be used to say what we actually mean and to help invite people in, especially white people, in to do the work, because we're the ones who actually have the work to do?
Well, I would say that there's work on both parts, because even though we talk about, and I would say rather than white people, I would say people who walk with privilege, walk with white privilege, and some of those people can have the same skin tone as I have, right? But it means that we've kind of drunk the Kool-Aid. We've drunk the Kool-Aid of segregation. We've drunk the Kool-Aid of inequality. And we will, in some ways, perpetuate it. So when we begin to talk about language, we do have to talk about the things that, rather than talking about minorities, we talk about people being minoritized. And that becomes a way of understanding that somebody did it to people. It didn't just happen. People didn't just wake up minorities. There was a process that occurred in which they became minoritized. We now talk about enslaved people rather than just slavery, because it puts the responsibility on a group of people or an institution in which something was done to people. And so I think we are always grappling with ways to talk about, what is happening in America. Racialization is a process that is very much woven into the very fabric of this country. And at the same time that we are articulating the idea of democracy, at the same time that it's being born, it is being predicated on the genocide of indigenous people. It is being predicated on what we now call human trafficking. I mean, that's what slavery was. It was human trafficking. We find that abhorrent now, but it is very much into the fabric of what this country is about. And I think we have to deal with those realities. And as those layers are being unpacked and disclosed and revealed, I think it's very problematic, because people don't want to see this, that at the same time that we talk about a country that is built on liberty and justice and freedom for all, that we can also have a country that is built on genocide and enslavement and the trafficking of human beings.
Yeah, I think that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, to come face to face with that on a daily basis, and then to also, work to change it. You do trainings, diversity trainings, and what has been the kind of pushback, especially right now? Because what I see largely when I look at the QAnon movement and I look at a lot of the white supremacy movements, it seems to be a clear reaction to the progress that people of color have had, that women have had. And so when you're doing your trainings, is this something that is that you're coming up against over and over and over again?
Absolutely. I would say that there are two major myths that one has to grapple with. One is the belief among whites in general, but those who walk with white privilege, that somehow inclusion means an extraction, that including larger groups of people of diverse backgrounds means somehow they're having something taken away from them. So that's one myth that people walk with. So they feel like that even as we talk about other people gaining, there's a fundamental belief that somehow they're being robbed, they're being things taken away from them. When you look at it statistically, it's not possible. So if African Americans are only 12% of the population, and at predominantly white, let's say, educational institutions, we're only 12% of the student body, those white students who didn't get in, instead of attacking the 12%, or which is usually not that large a group, usually it's between 6 and 8% of the entire student body. That means you have about 95, 93% of the student bodies who are basically white. And so the idea that somehow this small group is taking something away from this group that didn't get in is totally ignoring the reality that there is like 93% of that student body who you were really competing with. It wasn't the students who are minoritized, it's really the other 93%. And so what we're always doing is looking at inclusion and diversity as somehow an effect that is taking away from people. I think the other myth is that somehow these are new questions and new issues. We, as people of color, particularly Black Americans, we have been talking about inclusion and access and wanting to be really recognized as full citizens for a very long time. So this is not new to us. And so often when we're doing diversity training, and I work with a colleague of mine, Dr. Keishel Scott, who's retired from Grinnell College, as you know, when we do these trainings, we often find ourselves having to first unpack and historicize because people don't have a lot of the historical background. So they approach the issues as if somehow they just happened. It's new, you know? And I think that becomes problematic because you spend a lot of time, in effect, trying to basically teach people American History 101. And the irony, as you probably know, is that the Iowa State Legislature just passed a bill saying, not only can you not talk about the 1619 Project and slavery, but we will take money away from you, as if somehow not talking about an issue is going to make it disappear. You know, it's not going to disappear. And I think we have to find ways, whether it's inside the educational institutions or sort of what you're doing, which is using a platform that is outside of the traditional structure to provide people with pathways to acquire different kind of information and necessary information. This country cannot change if we keep falsifying the data, if we keep ignoring the facts, if we keep trying to do erasures, historical erasures, like let's pretend slavery never happened. And it's going to make it seem like what? That all people will Black people will disappear. It's not going to happen. And then there's the other side of it, which is that we have also become more invested and effective in our own liberation. And that means that we are not going to stand for people to try and isolate us and deny us and exclude us. So I think what's happening now in this moment of diversity is that we are asserting a kind of authority about who we are and what we bring to the table in ways that I think people are unaccustomed to. The civil rights movement was really about a kind of resistance in which it was not confrontational. And I think that what happened in the streets of Minneapolis, and I've lived in Minneapolis, so I'm very familiar with where the area was that George Floyd had died or was murdered, and then all the events that took place. I had been there just a few months before in that very spot. And so we're basically saying we will not be silenced. We will not be minoritized. We will not be erased. And I think that is something that the authority, the sense of power, that we have a right to talk about these things and to act on them and to protest, is not something that this country is accustomed to, at least in the most recent history. There's really been a sense that diversity has become a way for people to not address the issue. We talk about diversity, but we don't talk about racism. Most recently, people have been wanting to talk about caste, right? And instead of talking about caste, my question becomes, how is it that we keep trying to find analogies? Let's talk about caste instead of racism. Let's talk about it as class, socioeconomic status. Let's talk about, and the 800-pound gorilla in the room is race and racism. It is the bedrock upon which many other isms are built.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find what has just happened in Iowa I think sometimes people don't realize what they're admitting when they take the steps like they have in Iowa. And this seems to me to be an admission among the white people who are pressing to keep the 1619 Project from being taught, is that the love of country, the patriotism among white people is so thin and easily frayed that if we actually let our kids know what true U.S. history is, they will no longer love the country. And I find it so insane that with what African Americans in this country have been put through, Black people in this country have been put through, we don't question whether or not there is still love of country and patriotism. But God forbid white people teach their white children what actually happened. That might just make the whole white supremacy experiment completely fall apart. And the truth in education is so important.
Well, I mean, the reality is the people who lose in this are those who are white and those who walk with white privilege. And the reason I say that is that even when Black history was not taught in school, and it has only been, Black studies programs are only 50 years old, okay? The history of education in this country is much older than that. So we have experience of knowing when there's been erasure and omissions in the history. And so we created alternative ways of passing this information along about what the facts were. The number of lynchings, that was not something that was taught in school, but we were able to document it through Black newspapers, through Black scholarship, whether it was published by mainstream or accepted by mainstream or not. So the people who lose in this are really those who form the majority, this sort of dominant culture. And what they basically are saying is that ignorance is bliss, and that what they want to do is cultivate a kind of blissful ignorance. And often what we hear in our diversity training among people is, I didn't know. And that lack of information is somehow an explanation for why they don't have to take action. And so I think the people who lose in all of this, and I think it also is an example of extreme arrogance and desperation. It is an act of desperation after what happened at the U.S. Capitol for a state to actually pass a legislation that would outlaw, in effect, the teaching of slavery. I mean, it's ludicrous, and yet it happened. And it didn't happen before the event at the Capitol. It happened afterwards when everyone is saying, this is not us. How could this possibly have happened? What is happening with democracy? And yet they are now passing not just a resolution, but an actual bill that says, if you teach this information, we will take something away from you. It's amazing. And yet there hasn't been a public outcry. We've not heard from other states to say, no, you shouldn't do this. We haven't heard from, where are the protests now for something like this? What they're saying is that your child in Iowa will go to school and they will learn a partial history so that when they go out from the state of Iowa and encounter the world, they will be misinformed, disinformed, and disadvantaged because they're walking around with only a partial knowledge of what the reality of this country has been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's basically an assault on truth, and it's assault on reality. Yes. And people want to live as if this exists in a vacuum, and it clearly doesn't. And I even had a friend that I worked with in Chicago, and we were getting into a discussion about this. And I said to her, she's from Wisconsin, I said, doesn't it even bother you that like all of the door people, the people that work in all the lobbies downtown are all Black? And she said, they are? And then the next day at work, she's like, I started to pay attention, and it blew my mind. This is a 38-year-old woman. And I was like, how in the world have you not noticed it? And it was because she never had to. And I think with what's happened, in the last year is not only are people having to pay attention, but the lies, the hiding of the actual truth, everything is kind of spilling over at this point. And so people have to pay attention, which means we have to figure this out, because otherwise we're just going to be at odds constantly. So.
And I think the reality that most people don't know, most of the protesters who were in the streets of Minneapolis and around the country, a lot of those students, those people were whites. They were not just Black people or people of color. And they were saying, we want facts, we want truth, we know this is wrong. And this is one way that we can participate in trying to transform and change this country. And so I think that whether you teach it, if they have to go underground, and parents may have to do this, what it does, though, is that it puts the responsibility for telling the truth about American history back in the hands of the parents. What are you going to tell your child? How are you going to raise them? Are you going to raise them to be racist and sexist and homophobic? Or are you going to raise them to be people who believe in the true ethos of democracy, which all of us should be able to partake of and participate in? That is really the question that's on the table.
It's a good question.
That's a really beautiful, that's a beautiful spot to end on, because it's really a call to action for all of us. And as a mom, it certainly is for me, even though my boys are huge now. The teaching and the learning doesn't stop. So it's just a conversation have to keep having. Thank you so much for being with us today. This was a wonderful conversation to have, and God, it gives me it's a place of hope.
Yes. And thank you both for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Wow.
You and I have talked about this before. The this is not who we are nonsense, the white hand wringing, we're better than this. This isn't who we are. No, this is exactly who we are. Like, this has not been a 200 and some odd year play that we've been putting on. This is who we are.
We keep proving over and over and over again, this is who we are. And with that being said, it's time to name the winner of this week's Oh, for Fuck's Sake Award.
Yes, it is.
Given each week to the most, our nominees. Lindsey Graham, Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, and Ted Cruz. And remember, for those who didn't win, it's a dishonor just to be nominated.
And the winner of the losers this week is Lindsey Graham. Lindsey, you gleefully continue to undermine our democracy by perpetuating the big lie that Joe Biden did not win a free and fair presidential election. You threatened to have Kamala Harris impeached if Republicans win Congress back in 22. You don't even need a reason. I guess you just find it fun to threaten Black women. You're not even pretending to govern based on your non-existent principles anymore. You've made it completely clear it's not about the American people. It's about winning for you. If that means continuing to kiss Trump's ring and burn democracy to the ground, you are all in. Seriously, Lindsey, if Snowflake, Ted Cruz's dog, wisely decides to run away from Ted Cruz and Ted needs a new trained poodle, we're going to send him your way. And although we find you completely loathsome and want nothing to do with you, there's hope for you because the Georgia criminal investigation seems pretty keen on paying a lot of attention to you. So we're going to be watching to see how that works out. I'm certainly hoping that you have a very long relationship with the Georgia criminal justice system. So, Lindsey, this week, you are shining brightest among the losers. Congrats or something.
Lindsey's never going to change, but the rest of us can work together to push forward the change we all need. Here are a few things you can do. Call your members of Congress and urge them to quickly support and pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. 8 years ago, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was gutted by the Supreme Court. And since then, states have passed sweeping voter suppression laws. And right now, there are 165 bills in 35 states that have been introduced that would further restrict voter access for minorities, the elderly, and young people. The new Voting Rights Act would help protect voters from these discriminatory practices, and there is no time to waste. Stopping people from voting is the Republican campaign plan for taking the House and Senate next year. Also, your network. I am asking people to use their privilege because network influences network. So please, if you haven't done that, feel free to connect a woman or a person of color to an opportunity, an organization, or a group that they wouldn't normally have access to. It helps.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. We do have to open up those networks. And when I say we, I mean me and my fellow white people. We're very good about connecting our own children and folks who look like us. And we have to be really intentional about sharing that network and bringing other people along. We also have to make sure you don't miss the breakdown tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 Pacific with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson. Their guests tomorrow are going to be former Republican Congressman from Pennsylvania, Charlie Dent, and CNN commentator and Trump biographer, Michael D'Antonio. The Lincoln Project podcast is back and better than ever with the Lincoln Project's Reed Galen hosting. Subscribe and listen to the latest episodes of the Lincoln Project podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever else podcasts are found.
And keep connecting with us because we love to hear your voices. You can hashtag We're Speaking, leave us a voicemail, text, find us on Facebook, Twitter. We are out there, and we will be back next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on LPTV, the Lincoln Project's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. So we'll see you then.
Yeah, and finally this evening, we passed a grim, really tragic milestone on Monday with more than 500,000 American deaths from COVID-19. It's a number so massive, it's really hard to wrap your head around. And it's even more difficult to remember that every one of those numbers aren't just numbers, they're people. There's someone who was loved and who left a hole in people's lives and hearts.
New infection rates are going in the right direction for several reasons, not the least of which is finally letting the science and scientists lead and your efforts to protect yourselves and one another. But now isn't the time to let down our guard or your mask. And that includes covering your nose. And please get vaccinated if you're eligible.
And help others sign up. Especially older folks have a difficult time navigating some of the online signups. So please give them a hand doing that if you can. Help them arrange transportation if they need it to get to a vaccination appointment. Next week, we're going to be dedicating our show to discussing the pandemic. And, as we all grapple with what life and this incalculable loss means for us individually and as a nation and as a whole planet. We're suffering such a collective loss and trauma right now. So we'll talk about how we can each do our part to both end the national tragedy and then begin to heal and move forward together, bringing everybody along this time.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. Stick around at the end. We've got a clip from the Lincoln Project podcast, and then you submitted so many amazing posts and comments and tweets to our prompt this week that we're sharing some more after the show today. Please keep those coming. We really do appreciate your voices.
My longtime friend of 28 years would have to return to Earth before I could deal with her at all concerning the current situation politically, let's say. She's a successful business owner, she has a master's degree, and she is completely out of touch with reality. She attends a church that claims Trump is the second coming of Christ. Last I heard, she believes lizard people are running the country and Sandy Hook was a hoax. We have nothing in common anymore. I think maybe the hardest part to face is that I have no desire to renew that friendship whatsoever. I know that Biden wants unity. I would love to see unity. I just don't see how it can happen anymore.
Our mic's off.
I tried to engage with them. I tried to bring facts to bear. I tried to talk about values rather than facts and data. I've tried just about everything. I've lost a few friends. I'm still in the process of talking and trying to communicate with friends, but I'm somewhat at a loss as to where to go from here.
What the fuck?
Victimism has been the defining characteristic of what it meant to be an American. Trumpism is about pessimism more than anything else. If you ask these people who are storming the Capitol, and you ask the people at CPAC, do you think the next generation is going to be better off? They'll say no. And that's a very anti-American notion. And I think that we should be very careful not to allow that vision of America to be hijacked.